They called him a beast at auction. Until she whispered, "I know a good man when I see one." Dawn hadn't fully broken over Ashford when the crowd began to gather, boots crunching over frozen dirt, breath misting in the Montana air like restless ghosts. Eliza Warren stepped into the auction yard with her coat pulled tight, not because of the cold but because eyes always followed a widowed woman who walked alone. She ignored them. She'd come for a ranch hand, nothing more. Her fences were falling, her barn roof sagged, and the cattle had begun testing her resolve the same way her late husband once had, quietly, relentlessly. A shout cut through the murmurs. "Bring out the beast!" Chains clanked. The crowd shifted. And then she saw him. Jonah Hale was led into the yard by two bounty men who looked more winded than he did. His wrists were bound in iron, ankles shackled, a bruised cut at his temple catching the early light. But he stood straight, too straight for someone supposedly wild. His stillness unnerved the crowd more than any struggle might have. Silent, watching, measuring. The kind of man who'd lived in places where panic cost lives. Miriam Dawson strutted behind him, voice sharp as a branding iron. Half-breed trouble. Scout gone rogue. Dangerous. Best sold cheap before he decides to take a bite out of one of you. Laughter rose, thin, nervous. Eliza heard something else beneath it, fear sharpened by ignorance. She knew that sound. She'd lived under it during her brief marriage, every room shrinking when her husband's suspicions grew wild. She knew what it meant to be called something you weren't long enough that people believed it. Jonah didn't flinch at the insults. He just set his jaw, the way a man does when there's nothing left to defend but his dignity. The wind tangled his dark hair, revealing the high cheekbones and the calm depth in his eyes that didn't match the word beast at all. The bidding began cruelly, men tossing numbers as if wagering on an animal. $2, he'll make a fine breaker horse. $3, let him haul stone. That back's built for it. Eliza felt her stomach tighten. When one rancher barked, $4. I'll use him for sport before he gets too mean, Jonah's gaze dropped for the first time, not in fear, she realized, but in resignation. Like a man who'd seen the worst version of humanity too often to expect anything better. Before she knew she'd decided, her voice cut through the yard. $5. Silence snapped down like a trap. Every head turned. Miriam's eyes widened. You? Girl, you don't need this kind of trouble. I'll decide what I need, Eliza said, steady. Her heart hammered, but her voice held. She thought of all the times she hadn't spoken up in her marriage. All the times fear had kept her small. Not today. The gavel dropped. Sold. The bounty men shoved Jonah forward. Up close, he was taller than she expected, but thinner too, starved discipline, not brute strength. He didn't meet her eyes, as if waiting for mockery or commands. Eliza stepped closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. I don't believe what they call you, she whispered. I know a good man when I see one. His shoulders shifted, just a fraction, but it was the first real reaction she'd seen. Sheriff Cole Harding lingered near the gate, watching with something like cautious approval. He didn't interfere. Didn't warn her. That alone told Eliza the truth lay somewhere far from Miriam's accusations. She turned toward her waiting wagon. Come on, she said quietly. We're going home. Jonah hesitated, then followed, chains clinking with each step, pride holding him upright. The crowd stared, whispering behind their hands. But Eliza didn't look back. She'd bought more than a laborer. She'd saved a spark of dignity the world had been trying to stamp out. And though she didn't know it yet, Jonah Hale had just become the most dangerous thing a broken man could be. Hopeful. Snowmelt dripped from the barn eaves when Eliza pushed open the ranch gate, Jonah still walking behind her, chains clinking with each step. The place looked smaller than she remembered, lean fences, a half-collapsed shed, and earth trampled thin by a winter she'd barely survived alone. She felt Jonah pause at the threshold, not in fear, but in the quiet way a man assesses a place he might need to defend. "Come inside," she said. She expected argument. Instead, Jonah simply nodded. The kitchen greeted them with cold ashes in the stove and a silence too heavy for such a small room. Eliza lit the fire, aware of Jonah's watchfulness, the way his eyes flicked to exits, corners, shadows. A man with a past carved into instinct. "Sit," she offered. He didn't. Instead, he lifted his bound wrist slightly, as if asking permission rather than demanding release. That humility stung her. Eliza fetched the iron key from the drawer her late husband used to hide liquor money. When the lock clicked open, Jonah didn't step back or rub his wrists. He merely lowered his hands with a kind of disciplined acceptance she'd seen only in men trained to survive captivity. "You're free to move around," she said. "Work here, eat here. No chains." A muscle in his jaw shifted, surprise, not relief. She set food before him, day-old biscuits, leftover beans, and watched him hesitate before taking a bite, like a man testing generosity for hidden hooks. He ate sparingly, with that same controlled precision. Every movement told her he knew hunger intimately, but refused to let hunger own him. Outside, the wind rattled loose siding. Eliza pushed up her sleeves. "We start with the south fence," she said. "Cattle keep pressing through." Jonah followed her into the yard without complaint. The air smelled of thawing earth and wet pine. He studied the fence line the way her father once had, mapping weak points, measuring repairs with the eye of someone who understood structure, force, and wood grain. "You've done this before," she said. "I've built worse," he answered, voice low, even. That was all. They worked in silence, her hammering posts while Jonah lifted rails one-handed, stronger than he looked, but not with brute strength. More like calculated strength, shaped by years of needing to use exactly enough force and no more. By midday, her arms ached. Jonah still moved steadily, breath controlled, steps quiet on the thawing ground. When coyotes yelped beyond the ridge, he stiffened, not with fear, but readiness. He picked up a plank automatically, like a weapon, and scanned the tree line. "You're jumpy," she remarked. "Alive," he corrected softly. That answer lingered with her. As evening settled, she set stew on the stove. Jonah lingered near the doorway, unsure if he belonged at the table or the threshold. "You eat inside," she said. "You work here. You sleep under a roof." He met her eyes then, really looked, and something softened, just for a heartbeat. A man who'd forgotten what simple humanity felt like. Later, Sheriff Harding rode up, boots muddy, expression tight. "Just checking in," he said, eyes shifting toward Jonah. "You doing all right out here?" Eliza stiffened at the tone, protective, cautious, almost regretful. Jonah straightened, but didn't speak. Harding gave Eliza a look that carried warning and relief tangled together. "Watch the ridge," he said quietly. "Not everyone's pleased with your purchase." When he rode off, Jonah exhaled slowly. "Your sheriff doubts me." "He doubts everyone," she said. "But I trust what I see." Jonah glanced at her then, something new flickering in that calm, unreadable gaze. Gratitude, maybe. Or disbelief in the idea of trust at all. Night settled warm around the cabin. Eliza sat by the fire, watching Jonah repair a broken rail by lamplight, precise, deliberate, steady. He was no beast. Just a man learning how to breathe again. Dust blew in from town long before the riders appeared, thin, bitter-tasting grit that always carried news before mouths did. Eliza felt it first, a shift in the wind as she hauled a bucket from the well. Jonah was already watching the horizon, shoulders tightened the way they had each time he sensed trouble before others even heard it coming. "Riders," he murmured. Not fear. Recognition. By the time the silhouettes reached the ranch road, Eliza could hear the rumble of voices trailing behind them, town gossip carried like wildfire. She bought him. He's living under her roof. Half wild, they say. Dangerous. Rumors had always been quicker than stagecoaches in these parts. And today, they were aimed straight at her. Miriam Dawson rode at the front of the group, chin lifted high like a self-appointed judge. Her voice cracked across the yard the moment she dismounted. Eliza Warren. You got half the county talkin' about how you're keepin' that man of yours. Thought I'd best come see if you're still in one piece. Jonah stepped subtly between them, not enough to block her, but enough to make his presence unmistakable. Calm. Unmoving. A man who'd learned long ago threats didn't always come from guns. That's enough, Miriam, Eliza said, heat rising under her skin. You're on my land. Miriam sniffed as if the very air offended her. Women like you don't know what kind of devil you brought home. Eliza expected Jonah to stiffen, maybe drop his gaze the way he did when insults were meant to cut. Instead, he looked past Miriam to the strangers behind her, silent men exchanging uneasy glances. Jonah didn't flinch because he had heard far worse. From soldiers. From bounty men. From betrayal he carried like a silent scar. Miriam continued, voice dripping. Town says he once tore a man's throat out. Jonah's jaw tightened, not in guilt, but in a quiet, tired denial he no longer bothered giving voice to. I'm done listenin' to this, Eliza snapped. You can turn around now. Miriam opened her mouth again, but another rider cut through the crowd, taller, leaner, his hat pulled low enough to hide most of his face. A smirk tugged the corner of his mouth. Well, ain't this somethin', the man drawled. Jonah Hale alive and playin' house. Jonah went still. Not rigid, still. Like a trap resetting. Caleb, he said, voice low. Eliza recognized the name instantly. Someone dangerous from his past may come. Jonah had warned her days earlier. She hadn't expected him to appear so soon, or with such smug ease. Caleb swung his leg off the saddle and walked forward like a man inspecting merchandise he once owned. Heard you got yourself caught again, Caleb taunted. Told those bounty boys you'd fetch a good price if they didn't kill you first. Guess I was right. Eliza's breath hitched, anger igniting hot in her chest. Jonah didn't deny it. He only stared, not with hatred, but with the quiet betrayal of a man who'd once saved someone who didn't deserve saving. Miriam stepped back, suddenly unsure of her role in the drama. Eliza stepped forward. You were the one who turned him in. Caleb shrugged. A man's gotta eat. The simplicity of the answer cut deeper than the betrayal itself. Jonah finally spoke, eyes never leaving Caleb. Leave. Caleb chuckled. Not before I look around. Folks say she's keeping you like a pet. Thought I'd see for myself. Eliza felt Jonah shift closer, not a protective gesture, but a warning one. He wasn't afraid for himself. He was afraid Caleb might make Eliza a target just for giving him a place to breathe. The wind picked up, scattering dust between them. For the first time since Jonah stepped onto her ranch, Eliza saw something new in him, not resignation, not caution, but a simmering readiness born from old wounds left open too long. Caleb touched the brim of his hat. Just wanted to say howdy, friend. I'll be back. He turned his horse sharply, kicking dust over the yard as he rode away. Miriam, suddenly pale, gathered her men and followed. When the last hoofbeat faded, the ranch felt too quiet. Eliza turned to Jonah. He won't leave this alone, will he? Jonah's gaze stayed fixed on the road Caleb had taken, expression carved from stone. No, he said softly. Men like Caleb don't come to visit. They come to finish what they started. And for the first time, Eliza realized how deep Jonah's past cut, and how far its shadows reached. Snow crunched under hurried boots as Caleb Rourke rode straight up the ranch road at dawn, dust kicking behind him like a warning. Eliza stepped onto the porch with her shotgun resting loosely in her hands, more for statement than threat. Jonah was already outside, sleeves rolled, splitting timber with the same controlled strength he brought to every task. He looked up once, eyes narrowing the way a man narrows them when his past finally catches up. Caleb didn't dismount. "Step aside, Jonah. I'm talking back what's mine." Eliza stiffened. Beside her, Jonah set the axe down with deliberate calm, wiping his hands on his trousers like he was steadying himself for a reckoning long overdue. "You don't own me," Jonah said quietly. Caleb held up a folded paper, thin, dirty, smugly waved. "Got myself a claim right here. Says you were sold under fraud. Means you still belong to the man who turned you in." Eliza stepped forward, voice sharp. "You betrayed him to bounty hunters just to make coin. You have no claim here." Caleb smirked. "Law don't ask for your opinion, Mrs. Warren." But footsteps approached, Sheriff Cole Harding, riding up fast, jaw set hard as old iron. He dismounted and nodded once to Eliza before turning to Caleb. "Let me see that paper." Caleb handed it over with fake confidence. Harding scanned it, expression darkening with each line. Jonah stood still, not from fear, but from a lifetime of being judged without defense. Eliza felt that stillness like a bruise. "This is nonsense," Harding said finally. "Suspicious signatures. No witness marks. Looks like it was written by a drunk with a broken hand." Caleb's smile faltered. Eliza seized the moment. "Tell the truth, Caleb. You sold his name for bounty money. Jonah saved your life once, didn't he?" Jonah's shoulders tightened. "He never talked about it, never sought credit." Harding glanced between them, realization settling heavy. Caleb spat. "So what if he did? A man like him ain't worth loyalty. Thought bounty men would deal with him, turns out they didn't finish the job." That was the spark. Jonah stepped forward, not fast, not threatening, just steady, a man reclaiming ground that had been stolen. His voice was low, controlled. "You lied to them. Lied to the sheriff. Lied to me. Now you lie again." Caleb reached for his gun. Everything happened in one breath. Eliza gasped. Harding shouted. Jonah moved. Not wild. Not savage. Precise. He grabbed Caleb's wrist mid-draw, twisted hard, disarming him in a single motion that spoke of years trained to survive violence without becoming it. Caleb hit the ground, wheezing as the gun skidded across the dirt. Harding was on him instantly, boot on Caleb's arm, slapping irons on his wrists. "Caleb Rourke, you're under arrest for bounty fraud, falsifying legal documents, and attempted assault." Caleb cursed, spitting blood and dust. "This ain't over, Jonah." Jonah's face didn't change, but something inside him did. Eliza saw it. A weight loosening. A wound recognizing its own closing. Harding hauled Caleb upright. "It is over. For the first time, maybe." When the sheriff rode away with Caleb shackled to his saddle, the ranch fell quiet except for wind slipping through fence rails. Jonah stood alone in the yard, shoulders rising once with a slow exhale. Not relief. Release. Eliza stepped toward him, voice soft. "Jonah, your name is yours again." He looked at her, really looked, and in his eyes was something she hadn't seen before. The beginning of freedom. Dawn washed pale gold across the ranch when Jonah came down the porch steps with his bedroll slung over one shoulder, quiet, deliberate, the way a man leaves before the world can ask him to stay. Frost clung to the grass, cracking softly beneath his boots. Eliza heard the sound from the kitchen window before she saw him, a sound too final to mistake. She stepped outside. "You're leaving." Jonah didn't turn right away. He stood facing the open fields, the first place he'd ever been free to breathe, yet the posture of a man preparing to walk back into loneliness. "Eliza," he said quietly, "my name's cleared now. You don't owe me a roof, or trouble on your doorstep." Her jaw tightened. That old instinct, people leaving before she could ask them not to, pressed deep into her ribs. She'd felt it with her husband, with friends who couldn't stand beside a stubborn woman running a ranch alone. But Jonah wasn't leaving out of pride. He was leaving because he'd spent his whole life believing he was a burden. She stepped down from the porch. "Look at me, Jonah." He did. And for the first time she saw fear in his eyes, not of chains, not of violence, but of wanting something he didn't think he deserved. "I don't want you gone," she said. Wind brushed past them, carrying the smell of thawed pine and earth warmed by a sun winter couldn't quite extinguish. Jonah swallowed hard. "Eliza, you gave me back my dignity. That's more than any man has ever done. But I can't stay where I'm only." "You weren't only anything," she cut in. "Not a purchase. Not a burden. Not a mistake I feel shame for." His breath caught. She stepped closer until they shared the same cold morning air. "The day I bought you, Jonah, I didn't save you. I recognized you. And I won't let anyone in town rewrite that truth." He glanced toward the distant ridge where gossip still lingered like dust over water troughs. "They'll talk. Let them," she whispered. "I knew your worth before any of them dared look." Something broke open in him then, not loud, not visible to anyone but her. A tension long carved into his shoulders loosened. His fingers curled around the strap of his bedroll, uncertain, hopeful. The ranch was waking behind them, cattle lowing in the east pasture, the barn creaking as sunlight warmed its beams. Life carrying on. Quiet, steady, waiting for someone to choose it. Jonah lifted his bedroll, hesitated, then set it slowly on the ground. "Eliza," he said softly, "I don't know how to stay. Not properly." "You don't have to know," she answered. "You just have to want to." He exhaled, a sound equal parts surrender and relief. She reached out, resting her hand against his chest, feeling the heartbeat of a man who'd finally stopped running. Jonah covered her hand with his own. "I'll stay," he said. "If you'll have me as more than a hired hand." Her smile rose warm and real. "I wasn't asking for a worker, Jonah. I was asking for you." And just like that, the morning seemed to settle into place, brighter, steadier. A beginning instead of an ending. Later that week, when town whispers stirred again, Eliza walked through Main Street with Jonah beside her, not behind her, not hidden, but shoulder to shoulder. Miriam's mouth twitched. Others stared. Eliza met their eyes without flinching. "I knew his worth before any of you did," she said, and kept walking. Jonah did too. Right beside her.